Hi folks, do you remember this rig? Because this is our Antec rig that we did ages ago. And if I recall correctly, I said we were going to have another video using it where we mod it up. So with a basic loop now done, what about thinking about the future? I'm going to see how far we can take this little case. Well, now is the time. Of course, it's been so long, a whole load of new hardware has come out. So this old 1060, that's not going to do. What about an RTX 2060 instead? I think that will fit rather nicely. And this water loop is all a bit tired and boring. Why don't we make it a little bit more exciting? And actually the case is kind of in need of some work as well. Why don't we do some work to that? How about we paint the front? I'm thinking, since we've got a lot of mesh on here, how about a hexagonal pattern which we can work in and out? Should work nicely with the Tai Chi on the inside. Oh, we can also maybe have a go at the RAM. It's white at the moment. Why not make it silver or gunmetal grey, that sort of thing? So why don't we do that? We'll get some more lighting in the case. I'm thinking maybe we can have like a light panel in the base here. Maybe take some aluminium, cut it so we have a front panel, have it wrap around, cover the front of this lovely nickel-plated radiator. Maybe have another lighting panel at the top. And well, we've got a CNC machine. That means we're definitely going to have a distro plate. So I'm thinking we can replace this reservoir we've got over here with a distro plate with a pump built into it. And that should give us a really tidy, beautifully modded system. So let's get started. So we've got ourselves a bit of a plan, but to do that, we're going to have to take a lot of measurements and remove the old system from the case first. We're going to start by removing the loop. So we're going to drain it, then we're going to take out the GPU and the motherboard, and then finally the power supply. That'll give us a lot of access throughout the case and the ability to make the changes where we need them. The thing is, I'm going to be leaving the radiator in the case for now, because most of the mods that I want to do involve making shrouds and making other parts that go around it. So the plan to have something which goes on the bottom means I need to know exactly how far this radiator comes out and where it stops. Likewise, having a plate that goes over here replacing this means that I need to know exactly where it sits. So it makes sense just to keep it in there. I'd be having to put it back anyway. Okay folks, I apologise, but we failed. In fact, we failed rather badly. I figured that having it here on this side, it would allow us to have a drain system that's really easy to use. Little did I realise that the way that this particular pump and reservoir combo works is that this tube down the middle is preventing the fluid ever from coming out of that. In fact, it's created a nice empty void on the inside. And I thought it was going to work the other way around. So points docked there for carelessness. I guess I'm just going to have to do this the hard way. We've got the loop out of the case and sitting on the bench. I've also taken all the components out, so all we have left to do is to take a load of measurements. We can finally take some measurements and make some parts for this mod. So based on those ideas, this is what I've come up with for the interior work going into this case. As you can see, it's got quite a strong hex pattern. I quite like the honeycomb, and I think it should be quite interesting, especially when machined. And the idea is these acrylic plates will have LEDs running through them, and all the hexagons will reflect and refract the light, making that stand out. On the front, I have these aluminium panels, which are going to be made from 3mm aluminium. I'm going to leave them quite kind of raw looking in stock, I think, depending on the finish, and especially since I'm putting tiny little chamfers on the outside of all the parts that are going to be milled. For the acrylic parts, I'm going with 3 different designs. For the base, it's going to be 15mm using a 10mm plate and a 5mm plate, with the hexagons milled into the 10mm acrylic. I've got LEDs which are going to be running down the side, so we can have addressable LEDs to get that proper argy-bargy action going. It's going to be a similar story for the top, but I'm using a slightly different hex pattern, so this is going to be a 30mm hexagon rather than the 20mm down there. It's slightly less visible, and I just wanted to have a larger pattern, both for machining ease, and also because I think I can get a better finish if I make them a little bit larger. The distro plate's quite an interesting one, because it's not just a distro plate. So this is a reservoir, and it's going to be housing a pump. So I'm going to be using a DDC pump, just like with the previous part of the build, but this time it's going to be built into this plate. This large hexagonal reservoir will then feed directly into the pump through the inlet here, and then that will come out, go up the tube, and then go through the rest of the loop. On the front here, you'll see this port. That's going to be for drainage. Now, of course, it's a little bit above the pump, but this is the lowest part of the system, basically, so I should, in theory, just be able to turn the system on its side and then drain the majority of the liquid out. In terms of cam, this is going to be a fairly tricky one, although a lot of it's also quite straightforward. The main deal is going to be getting a good surface finish on all these hexagons, because there's a lot of rising and falling, and they're all at different depths. So I'm going to have to be very careful and make sure that the tooling is going to be okay with that. Similarly, there's lots of angles, so you see all these corners. Now what I've done is I've rounded them so that there aren't going to be any sharp changes in direction for the tool. So in theory, that should mean that I can get a better surface finish. So we're back in the workshop. It's lovely miserable outside. About time we got some CNC stuff going. The only thing is, our material here is just a little bit on the big side, so I think we should cut it up and make it the correct size. Now, Tony said that if I just draw a line somewhere like around here, then with any luck, if I put a chisel in the middle, I should... Perfect! Wow, that's much faster. have to admit, I'm really quite pleased with how these plates came out. In particular, this one over here, because the milling marks in it are so much finer than anything that I've done before. I think that's largely down to the new fixture plate, keeping things very rigid and making sure that it's very flat. But in any case, you could see right through it. It's not as easy to see now though, because I've added a frosted acrylic layer to it. Now that's designed so that it can diffuse the lights, which are going to be going down this channel. If you take a look over here. So the LEDs are going to be in that channel and they're going to be diffusing across it. And obviously if it's completely clear, you won't get any color. So what I've done is I've frosted one side just so that the light will diffuse through it, a bit like a larger light panel. To go with that, I've also made a pump distro plate. Now this one is going to be face on, so it's going to be really kind of in your view and in your face. And I've got a DDC mounted into the back. And now I've never done one of these before. I've designed them, but I've never actually cut one out. I've only ever done the D5s before. So for me, this was quite an interesting experiment. And when the loop is actually going, it'll be kind of efficient. And I'm hoping that it's also not going to be too loud. I tend to use D5s because they're quieter and they're not as sort of whiny as a DDC. So hopefully it won't be too loud. If it is, maybe I'll have to tweak the design to isolate the pump a little bit more in the future. In any case, it's an experiment and it's worth trying it out. Well, this one over here is the first one that I actually cut out. Again, this one came out really well, but I used a slightly smaller hexagon pattern. So the honeycomb on here is much smaller. This is 20mm per hexagon. I'm thinking that maybe it's going to be a little bit denser, which is good because it's going to be very much in view. The other thing is it did mean that it needed more machining time, and you get more machining marks on this one because I used an end mill that had a little bit of a chip, as I found out after I'd finished it. So that was a bit of a shame. But now I need to make the covers that are going in front. And to do that, I'm going to be using this stuff, 3mm aluminium. Aluminum. Now, the idea here is I want there to be a little bit of structural integrity as well. So I've got mounting points built into these aluminium covers. That means I'll be able to screw into both the top and the bottom plates and hold everything in place around the case nice and evenly, not putting too much stress on any one particular joint. The other handy thing about using the 3mm aluminium is that I can cut fairly deep into it. So what I'm going to be doing is taking the honeycomb pattern that you saw in the CAD, going down 1mm in, and I'm going to be adding chamfers along all the edges. In my opinion, the chamfers really make the aluminium cuts because they pick up the light from different angles and make it sparkle and glint. And it also just adds a bit more of a premium kind of look to it, especially if you polish them. Let's get this material on the CNC and cut them out. Well, to say I'm happy with how these plates came out is a complete understatement, because I think they look, quite frankly, fantastic. I'm a huge sucker for thick aluminium, and especially when you're cutting away at it, it has this beautiful contrast that comes out, especially when you leave the surface finish in the stock way rather than polishing it up. Sometimes it's better to do that. I'm going to be leaving it stock on this one. The pattern came out really, really strong, and I'm very happy with the way that the chamfers have added to it as well. Cutting aluminium is one of those things that it's, in theory, quite simple. Sometimes though, depending on the material, depending on your settings, it can be a little bit tricky. You have to have some kind of coolant system running, and I'm always a little bit wary about it on my machine. So I prefer to go kind of quite fast, but a shallow kind of cut rather than going deep. Helps to prevent chatter, and also it just makes it better for chip evacuation. Because you don't want to be recutting chips. You also don't want to be putting excessive heat into the tool, because that's how you're going to gum it up. And then of course these are only like tiny little tools, maybe 2 to 3 millimeters that I use for these, 6 millimeters for the chamfer mill, but everything else is quite small. So you put a little bit too much into that, it's just going to snap and it's going to be completely useless, and it might wreck your workpiece, and it's certainly going to wreck your end mill. They're not particularly expensive, the tiny ones, but at the same time, you might be several hours into a part like this and it snaps and then it continues cutting and it just completely ruins it, so you're going to have to start again. I'd rather avoid that, so I keep it nice and simple. With the majority of the fabrication out of the way, I think the next thing to turn our attention to is cabling. So I've got some white sleeving here, I've also got some purple and some silver. So I'm going to be making up some custom extensions for these. I'm not going to be going through to the power supply itself, because we're going to be using this power supply in future mods and things. So rather than replacing the cables, I'm going to be making some extensions that can be reused later on. Let's hop to it. Let's chop some 16 gauge wire up. Now that we're armed with our new extensions, it's about time we got round to painting the case, installing the components back into it, and finishing up this mod. Rather than using rattle cans, I thought it'd be a little bit more fun though, to use my little compressor. Isn't it cute? Basically, I'm going to be airbrushing onto the front of the chassis, just going with a nice simple silver. So I'm not going to be doing any crazy pictures or designs. I just want to keep it in keeping and then add just a little bit more visual interest to the outside of the case. I might, if I have the time, try and do the same to some of the components on the inside. Maybe the RAM, since it sticks out being white and all, that would be quite good if that were made silver. My main reason for wanting to use the airbrush is that it's just much more practical for me. My space is very, very small and limited, and also it's quite cold outside, so I can't do any spray painting out in the garden. So I'm gonna have to do it in here, And using rattle cans means that mess gets absolutely everywhere. I have to be really careful to make sure that it doesn't get onto the CNC machine or any of the other components in here. So I'd much rather use the airbrush as it has far more control. Yeah, it still makes a little bit of mess, but it's easier to contain. So I'm going to be going with that. Plus, it's just a bit more fun. Well folks, I hope you've had as much fun following along with this build as I've had making it. This has been a really exciting and challenging build for me, largely because it's been mostly about refining processes. So trying to achieve the best finishes I possibly can on the aluminium and on the distro plates, along with adding features that I haven't done before, like the DDC into the distro plate on the front. I was really happy with how that particular one came out because the pump is really quiet. I was worried maybe there might be a little bit of reverberation and it could be quite loud. Turns out, even at full speed, it's quite quiet, but at 40%, it's all but inaudible, which is great. This is going to be a very quiet system. Of course, if you did like the build, be sure to drop us a like and a comment and subscribe to the channel while you're at it. We're gonna have plenty of other crazy, exciting builds just like this one, and even more so, coming up in the future. I'll see you then.